Translating Lewis Carroll into a dead language, where do you even begin?
Um, I'd just like to begin by saying, just as an aside, that I really don't like the term dead language. I sort of, when I started doing these translations, I sort of set my mind against it, because I don't like the idea that Old English is dead. There are people out there writing it, lots of people, and it's
Myself
pretty
included.
popular. Do you?
Oh, yes, all
You'll
the
have to
time.
share some of that with me at some time. Um, so I tend to say archaic language, and that emphasizes the connection between Old English and Modern English, that it is just, an earlier version of the language we speak. But that aside, well, where you begin, with difficulty, I would say, because it's not an easy thing to do, as you know if you've been doing it. The tools that we've got are not meant for that. They're meant as aids to reading. Um, and So you have, Old English dictionaries, but no Old English dictionaries, at least not good ones. And and there are, and the grammars are oriented either towards a kind of linguistic approach, or towards just helping people read the language. So you have to adapt the tools that we've got to, um, to the task of writing it. Um, so that's the starting place, just knowing how to manipulate the tools we've got so you can do it at all. So you can find the words, find the constructions and so on. But I encourage people just to sit down and do it once they've got those basics down. Just to you know do their best. People mess up a lot, and that's fine. If they're having fun doing it, it you start by just starting, I suppose.
Right.
I started after having taught the language for many years. Um, I suppose, like 35 years of teaching it. So I knew the language well enough, that I thought at least that I could make it sound somewhat idiomatic and so on, without having to worry a whole lot about the grammar books and so on.
Would you describe Lewis Carroll as a particularly difficult author to translate?
Difficult, in some ways, yes. And in well, everybody knows that he uses a lot of puns, and I would say that probably the main difficulty that faces the 300 or so people who have taken on the task of translating, Lewis Carroll over the years, have probably found that the most difficult thing, because puns simply don't translate. You might think they would translate a little bit better into Old English than into other languages, but it turns out that they really don't. It's so you've got to come up with substitutes most of the time, and that's really difficult. Puns are difficult. Otherwise, I think it's just good fun mostly. I mean, it's tons of fun to come up with a word for, oh, say croquet. You know, it's lots of fun to come up with new words, uh, and then there was for this particular translation, it was lots of fun to see how much I could carry it back to the Old English period, to that early medieval world. It wasn't possible to do it entirely. I mean, you can't lose the croquet, you can't lose the playing cards, um, but which weren't there, of course, in pre-conquest England. Uh, but but so you just leave in the anachronisms, and they turn out to be kind of funny, and then and you do what you can about, say, tea, turning tea into beer, and so on. So
Yeah.
it's just a lot of fun, actually.
Do you have like a what passage do you think was the most entertaining to work with in that regard?
Um, well, not chapters. What were they? 9 and 10, the ones with the with all the puns. They're the chapters with the mock turtle and the griffin, um, who make so many puns about the sea and school and all that. But that was hard. But I think my favorite turned out to be chapter 5, I think, with the caterpillar and the poem Father William.
Mm.
I've always loved that poem anyway. Your old Father William, the young man said, and the way it sent up the kind of literature that was forced on children back in the 19th century, this kind of dreary morality that they were forced to memorize and recite at a moment's notice. Um, and then just translating that into an Old English idiom, into Old English meter, trying to get the way they used formulas uh, and compounds, kennings, and so on, trying to get all that right. That was uh, that was lots of fun, and I thought it came out pretty well, even though the crazy thing I came up with is about twice as long as the original, which is a bit nutty, but there it is. Old English poetry is verbose anyway.
Yeah.
So I like that, and I like the caterpillar, um, and so that was fun. And But I like the poetry generally. I like the little poem about the owl and the panther sharing a pie. That was a favorite of mine. Um, but But otherwise, they most of the chapters were pretty much equally fun for me. But I'm pleased. I'm most pleased with chapter 5 somehow. I don't know why.
Yeah, I saw there. I was quite surprised and impressed to see the amount of poetry included in the book. I've written quite a bit of Old English poetry, and I know kind of how difficult it is. You know how kind of it takes me a very long time to get through it, even as formulaic as it is. Would you consider, the formulaic aspect to be something that really helped you in that regard,
Yeah,
or
actually, I do. I was going to say, as you were saying, how difficult it is. Yeah, it is difficult, but the but the formulaic character of it helps, and the verbosity of it helps, because you don't have to translate line for line. You can take your time. You can take as much space as you want, pretty much, um, and just find those alliterations. Make up words if you have to. I'm persuaded that the Beowulf poet made up a lot of words. There's a lot of words in there that are just one-offs. Uh, and Yeah, I think it was a help. It's a little hard to explain how, but as I say, when you do a thing in 2 lines that Lewis Carroll did in 1 line, when you give yourself that liberty, then things tend to fall into place a little more easily.
that makes a lot of sense, especially considering how long these kind of like closer to modern like English romantic lines where they just had I think they just had more words per line than the average Old English metrical line, you know? So I think that that's a pretty good liberty to give yourself, you know?
Yeah, my old dissertation advisor wrote an article once comparing the style of Old English poetry to the style of oh darn, I forgot. I've lost his. Oh, Gerard Manley Hopkins in the Victorian period, who was very fulsome, um, and very ornate and verbose, and lots of fun, really. And Yeah, it's
You studied at
I sort
Yale,
of lost my
correct?
train a little bit there, but it's it helps.
Yeah, you studied at Yale, correct? So that would be Fred Robinson, no?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Fred Robinson's work. I mean, I don't really think you can study Old English much and not become very familiar with his work. But yeah, my Tom Mosier was also quite fond of him.
Hmm.
My professor when I studied Old English. But that's great. So could you speak a bit to the viewers as to why you decided to publish a new edition? Kind of what your thought process was there?
Um, I had been thinking for quite a while, because it got to me that people were using this translation to try to learn Old English, and and even using it in the classroom sometimes, in Old English classes. And I thought that was a little crazy in a way. I never tried it myself, oddly. Never really tried to get my students to read it. Um, but I thought that it would be good to have helps for students built in to to the book. Um, I mean, the biggest help is just to simply take a copy of Alice in Wonderland and set it side by side with the Old English text. But but I thought it would be good to have some glosses, some explanatory notes about grammatical difficulties. And as I went on, it occurred to me, well, just build in this magic sheet that I did years ago, a quick summary of Old English inflections, and just put that in there so people can flip uh, to it and say, what is this ending? What is it doing? What is this word? Um, so basically, I wanted to have the same kind of helps in the book that are in any Old English textbook. So I decided to do that. And I am also a control freak, I have to say. I I like to have total control over a book. Of the books I published during my academic career, I think four or five of them I set and typed myself. Um, Going back to the 90s, when you had to send in printed copy to camera ready copy if you wanted to do that. But I've always really enjoyed just making the book, as well as writing it. And so I wanted to do that too. I wanted control over the production. Um, and the easiest way to do that was just to kind of self-publish it, which I did.
Awesome. Yeah, I just ordered my copy about an hour ago. I saw on your Facebook post that it had just been made public.
It will
So,
probably get to you before my author copies get to me. It turns out that author copies are not a big priority at Amazon. I'm expecting them in about 12 days,
oh wow.
which is sort of not the way Amazon usually does business. But so all I've got is a proof copy here.
Gotcha. Are you familiar with the Latin textbook, Familia Romana, Lingua Latina Persa Illustrata? It's like the Latin kind of picture textbook.
No, no, I don't know that.
It's a really popular language learning textbook, and your glosses were done at least in the similar style of I think it's called like Orbergian style. In the only difference is that his glosses would gloss it in Latin, and yours,
Hmm.
of course, give it like a modern English translation.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
having it right there next to the text, I find to be extremely helpful for the learner at least, and honestly for myself, I do. You use quite a impressive range of vocabulary in the book that I constantly have to continuously be looking words up as I'm going along. I find it much more probably just the nature, but I find it much more difficult than say like an Alfred homily, you know?
Hmm. Oh, it is? Okay. I'm sorry about that.
No, no. I mean,
It's
difficult not in a syntactical way, but in like
Yeah,
Alfred never
vocabulary.
talked about
Yeah.
like croquet, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So the Latin textbook, was he glossing like in the manner of say a manuscript of Aldhelm, whose Latin was so difficult, glossing hard Latin words with easier Latin words. Is
That is, yeah, that is
that was
generally
his thing? Yeah.
expressions and stuff. In the same way that, for
Um,
example, you will have sometimes you'll have multiple words, you'll have one word. It was the same thing, just
mhm.
glossing them
Yeah,
right on the
sometimes
side.
gloss the phrase, sometimes gloss the word.
Hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce people to a range of vocabulary and different ways of expressing the same thing sometimes. Yeah, I did throw in some words that are a little bit unusual. Um, but sometimes it was just kind of a desperation thing, trying to find the right word is can be difficult, you know.
Well, I find it a strength of the book. I think it's a really nice. It's almost like an exhibition of the Old English corpus in that, you are taking words and phrases and sayings from every single source available, which kind of gives the reader a sort of like panopticon of Old English texts. At least
Hmm.
that's the way that I saw it. I was pretty excited to see words that I was really unfamiliar with, because then I would find the texts that they were in and be like, well,
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean, I've never read that, I've never
yeah,
read
yeah,
this
yeah,
glossary.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, for usage, I didn't target any particular text or era, and I suppose I don't think I did that really deliberately, sort of uh, making things, using unusual words. Um, but I was targeting just kind of general Old English for spelling and stuff. It was mainly early West Saxon because in that first version we expected students to get hold of the Clark Hall Dictionary and use that mainly. Um, so I wanted the spellings to match what students would find in there. That's less necessary for the second edition. Um, but um, sorry, uh, but the early spellings remain. But
Right.
I was just hauling things out of my head, things I remembered from King Alfred or from different poems um, and of course from Alfred, which I've taught a lot of over the years. So um, yeah.
Are you familiar with the site Wiktionary? That is like the dictionary half of Wikipedia.
I have seen it and I've used it a little bit. Um, and I'm not sure what to think of it because I haven't really spent a lot of time with it. I'm a bit wary of online tools. They are full of mistakes. Um,
Sometimes, for sure.
yeah, I did a curious thing a little while ago. Um, I took the text of my Alice chapter by chapter, and I fed it into ChatGPT, asking it if it could see any errors. Um, and it came back with I suppose that it's mainly informed by online tools that it scraped um, Wiktionary and so on, other things. And it came back with lists of words that it said were not attested in Old English that actually were, um, and uh, and words that it suggested that I respell or change the endings in impossible ways and that kind of thing. It was really pretty awful. And I don't know whether that's just the weakness of ChatGPT, which is very far from the super intelligence they're aiming to produce one day, um, or whether it's the fault of the materials it was scraping from the internet. I'm not sure.
Right. I think it would probably be the former. I've been told by those who know about this stuff much more than I do, that the method that it uses to generate answers is extremely that it's sort of like it's always guesswork. That is, it tries
Mhm.
to sort of paint a picture for you of what it thinks you're trying to look for. And so it will kind of just say random things as long as they kind of look like what you might find in a Google search. Um,
Yeah, it seems to be very interested in buttering me up, um, in and figuring out what I want to hear. It's sort of like a politician or something in that way, you know. Well, what do you want me to say? You know, I would like to please you. Um, but I was asking for it to find errors, and it basically didn't find any, though I'm sure there must be some. But it wasn't able to find them. It just
Well, I haven't noticed any in my read through. And the reason I brought Wiktionary up is because the decision to remain in early West Saxon actually is extremely helpful for learners because now that is like the most commonly used dictionary of Old English is Wiktionary
ah,
itself.
I see. How
Almost all
complete
of
is
the
it?
I'd say perhaps 70% of words in Bosworth Toller's dictionary are on Wiktionary at this point.
The
And
most
it's
common ones that
all
it's
of the most commons for sure,
okay.
for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
A lot of editors will simply just go through texts and put every single word they find on Wiktionary, and that's the way
I
they do
see.
it. But it
Because
uses early West Saxon.
the words that ChatGPT was telling me didn't exist were often words that were attested once in a gloss or something like that. And Alice is full of that kind of thing because it's got things like pots and pans and cats and dogs and stuff like that that really don't get talked about too much in your heroic poetry and your homily texts, you know. So they're pretty rare words, even though they must have been common at the time, you know, in conversation.
Yeah, I found your
But
discussion
they won't
on
make it into if people are recording everything they find in Alfred's, then these words are not going to make it into Wiktionary. They
yeah.
have to go through glossaries and stuff.
I found your discussion on hemp pretty interesting. That the kind of decision to move away from the caterpillar smoking because of like, we just don't have any evidence that they even smoked at all in the Old English times.
Yeah, that was hemp is a fascinating word to me
Hmm.
because it's you tell people, well, it's cognate with cannabis, you know, um and they say, no, it can't be. Well, it is, you know, you can show them how. But so it's kind of a fun word, but the uh but you know, using the drinking horn, you know, instead of smoking turned out to be so extremely attractive. And the illustrator of the first edition just loved that too. And so we went with the drinking horn. Um, but but it would be fun to do something with hemp. I mean, they had it obviously, and they talk about it, and they have it in medical recipes, which is a bit odd. It probably didn't help much, but maybe it, you know, as I say in the introduction somewhere, maybe it felt made people care less about being sick or something like that.
Have you ever read Hildegard von Bingen?
Some of her, some of her
She has a treatise where she discusses the use of hemp, and she says that it makes
medical
the,
use.
I think she just refers to its use in general.
Mhm.
And she says that it makes like the smart man smarter and the dumb man dumber.
Does she talk about how they would use it? Would they smoke it or make a decoction or something?
I really don't remember. I don't remember if she talks about the actual use, just the effects. Um,
Hmm.
but it is really interesting to see that they knew about the effects of marijuana, and that was the way she just decided to describe it, was that it makes intelligent people more intelligent and unintelligent people less intelligent.
Oh, that's an interesting observation. Yeah. I don't quite believe it. I think, I think it tends to make smart people a little dumber, but
Well,
it's all right. I mean, it's something I should dig out and read because it sounds entertaining.
it
I
is
don't
pretty
think I've
interesting.
ever read any of her medical stuff. I read some of her stuff on child conceiving and
Mm.
uh, and what makes a strong child and that kind of thing.
Interesting.
She's always interesting. I like her paintings. They're pretty amazing.
Um, have you ever heard of the musical group Sequentia or
I
Benjamin
think I've
Bagby?
heard of it, but I haven't looked into them.
Benjamin Bagby is famous for his Beowulf performances.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if you've ever seen those,
yeah,
but he
I
he
know that.
also has this music group and they sing all of Hildegard's music and it's pretty good. But
Hmm. Oh, I'll have
you
to look that up.
you mentioned a couple times a Harry Potter translation in the introduction for your Alice in Wonderland book. Is that translation, has it been abandoned? Are there any perhaps plans to revive it?
I got partway into chapter 9, and I I decided that I wasn't going to find a publisher for it. I tried to get in touch with Bloomsbury, but they don't like to be contacted. You've got to get an agent and so on. And I just never thought there was enough money in it to justify an agent. So so I just eventually I didn't lose interest. It was fun to do, and I would have been glad to finish it, but I decided there was going to be nothing in it. So it wasn't going to get published. And it's different from an Alice. You can just publish it. You don't have to go looking for anybody's permission. There is a chapter, or not a chapter, a fragment of a chapter that got published in a journal called Studies in Medieval and Renaissance Teaching. Um, and and they wanted me to write an article on translating or in writing Old English. And so I did that, and they wanted a sample, and I gave him a sample, the passage where Harry on Diagon Alley goes to buy a wand. I think that's just such a brilliant passage, meeting Mr. Ollivander and so on, um, and kind of creepy in a good way. Uh, and uh, and I contacted I don't remember who I had to contact to get permission to do it. And they said, sure, just, we just want you to donate 300 pounds to J.K. Rowling's favorite charity, which had to do with orphaned children in Ukraine or something like that. I mean, a very worthy thing, but still, I mean, it wasn't 300 pounds for J.K. Rowling, but for her charity, that's good. But still, 300 pounds, a lot of money for publishing maybe 500 words out of Harry Potter. And I thought, well, this it's just not practical to do this unless you've got the backing of a major publisher. Um, it would just be way too expensive to get the rights.
Hmm. That's
Um,
unfortunate. I think people would have really liked to read something like that.
yeah, yeah. I've got a friend who used it very very carefully to avoid, having it escape into the wild and getting me or her in trouble. But she actually gave a course on using Harry Potter as an entrance, using that Harry Potter translation as an entrance into the Old English language. And apparently they had a pretty good time with it.
Huh.
Um, but again, she had to be very careful because you could get into trouble with um, if it escaped. I think it's probably fine to pass it around a classroom, um, but fortunately, it didn't get into the wild, and I didn't get into trouble for it.
Right. Speaking of entering into Old English, a lot of times people will ask me, where does a beginner start ground zero, to learn Old English? And I'm almost always your materials are included in my answer to that question.
Mhm.
So, what would you say to a sort of autodidactic learner who wants to begin learning Old English from ground zero? Where do they go? Where do they start?
I should preface this with a disclaimer that I haven't had a whole lot of contact with autodidacts in Old English since I've been in universities and teaching classes, and that's my um, that's my method. But I would say start with things that are late and easy. Um, I think the question you gave me in advance mentioned something about the Genesis passage. That's great. Not it's easy. It's repetitious. It uses words over and over again. There's relatively little vocabulary that doesn't survive. And of course, you can get a translation. You can just kind of reach out your hand and grab a translation there. Translations of Genesis are easy to get, obviously. So so set the things side by side and see what you can get just by comparing the texts, and then dig a little deeper and learn about each word as it comes up, I would say.
Yeah,
Um,
so you mentioned the Genesis passage. I read in an article, I think in Fred Robinson's Festschrift,
mhm.
was when you wrote the article about Latin words in Old English,
Yeah.
which was a great read, by the way. And I think in that article, you mentioned Genesis as one of the first texts. What other texts do you generally start students on in Old English?
Um, I tend to want to move off of texts with easily available translations. Usually, the second text I have done is The Life of Saint Athelthryth in my textbook. Again, Alfred, late, the syntax is pretty straightforward. The vocabulary is not extreme, and uh, and it's interesting to students. You wouldn't think there would be a big market for Saints' Lives, but my students have always liked Saint Athelthryth, and um, so next I think is to go on to things that don't have easily available translations, and see how you can do on your own. Students, the students who are teaching themselves can get hold of Skeet's old edition of Alfred's Lives of Saints on archive.org, and and what I would encourage people to do is to do your best sentence by sentence for a few lines at a time, and then check against the translation, see how close you got to translating it correctly. Um, and don't move on until you're satisfied that you understand everything in the sentences you've just done.
What,
Um,
in
yeah.
your experience, what has kind of been really difficult for beginners in Old English?
Um, well, there's the word thaw. You, I actually have a friend who told me once that she decided she would, a graduate school friend who decided she would do Middle English instead of Old English literature because she hated the word "tha," because it does so darn many things. Uh, it can be a conjunction, an adverb, or a pronoun. Um, Maybe it can do other things that I've forgotten, but that's enough. It can be doubled. It can be in all kinds of constructions, making other words do weird things, um, and it's just a crazy word. Um, but there's there's that. That's not terribly serious. Students get a handle on that. Uh, but it really all depends on the student and what they're bringing to the task. If you've learned several languages, and especially if any of them are like Latin or German, with cases and so on, um, then probably very little is actually going to throw you for a loop. Um, but but students who don't have that will have to work harder, let's say. Um, but there are Old English is full of false friends, words that look like you should know what they mean, um, but but they don't, either because the meaning has changed over the centuries or because it really isn't connected to the modern word you think it is. So that can be a problem for students. It's a pain to look things up. Um, and even with the the clickable text in Old English aerobics, uh, students often spare themselves the trouble. They say, "I think I know what that means," and they get it wrong. And but yeah, the the verb system is pretty easy. The noun system is absolutely insane. Um, it's just a huge pain. And it must have been a pain for them in a way because they pretty much abandoned the whole thing very shortly. So s- yeah, the noun system is difficult. Pronouns are easy. Verbs are pretty easy. Nouns are hard. Adjectives are hard, I would say.
What generally kind of really grabs the student's attention? What kind of is are the more fun texts for your students in your experience?
Um, I mentioned they like the Athelthreeth. They like it when we go on, as we tended to do around the middle of the term, to the story of Cadman, which gives them their first taste of poetry. And it's a pretty good story too. I mean, that's why, uh, Bede told it, and it's also echoed in other traditions. That story of getting poetic inspiration in a dream. Um, so they tend to like that, and then when we get on to then after that we just go on to poetry, and they like that. We do the Dream of the Rude. We did the Dream of the Rude. It's all past tense now. I'm retired. We did the Dream of the Rude. We did the Wanderer, and we did riddles, which are fun, and they pretty much liked it all. I just did, the more popular poetry, um, so they like that.
When we
Yeah,
were talking before this, I mentioned my brother went to UVA. That is, he still goes to UVA,
that's right.
and you have a note in your introduction about the Gebeorscipe word, and
Hmm.
that your students always kind of giggle at it. And you mentioned the what is it? Mad beer parties of the
Mad
UVA
beer party.
fraternities.
Yeah.
And my brother, who is in one of those UVA fraternities, I sent him that passage, and he thought that was a pretty funny way to phrase it.
Yeah, and my students always translated Gebeorscipe as beer party, and though that wasn't the way I glossed it, I don't think in the textbook, um, but uh, but they thought it was funny, um, and they connected it again with the beer parties they knew. And actually, a Gebeorscipe is it's metonymic. You can use it of any gathering, whether beer is served or not, um, of any gathering, a banquet, really. Uh, and so it doesn't really refer in a very specific way to the alcohol. It's just part of the word. I suppose alcohol was probably served at every banquet at that time. But yes, they always liked that. Um,
I have a video on this channel where I talk about kind of how to talk about drinking in Old English. And the first
uh,
thing I say is that I'm at a Gebeorscipe, um,
mhm.
diciamo, on Gebeorscipe.
uh,
I think it glosses at Latin convivium though, doesn't it? The which just kind of meant like a party, like a group of
is that the
friends.
word Bede uses?
I think it is
'Cause I
convivium.
didn't I didn't check. You see, I'm not surprised because I think that would be the natural translation. again, I think you could use the word without necessarily thinking about beer
Hmm.
or wine or anything else. It was just a gathering where food was or where something was consumed, I think. A banquet, in short.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Could you talk a bit to the story of kind of how you yourself got into studying old languages, Old English in particular? What began it for you?
Um, I've always been something of an antiquarian. I always liked old things. When I was growing up, it could be antiques or reading history or anything like that. And then in college, I had a very charismatic teacher um, in a survey of medieval literature. And and he just made me think, well, this is extremely cool stuff. I like this. And I just kind of gradually over the years, I took Old English with him and Beowulf with another guy, and just decided that I would go to graduate school and study it more deeply. Um, so I liked. It turned out that I just liked everything to do with language too. I liked thinking about language, and I liked thinking about it historically. Um, so I studied a lot of linguistics too, and um, I just thought it would be a kind of fun life to to study Old English and teach it, and for the most part, it was.
What was it like working with Fred Robinson?
Fred was an amazing teacher. Um, he could be intimidating, though he never intimidated me, but I saw him intimidate other people because he was very demanding. I mean, if you came in to the class not having prepared the passage he wanted you to prepare, the first class I ever had with him was advanced Old English, and he wanted you to do the reading. So if he detected that people hadn't done the reading, he was fierce. But he uh, was he as a dissertation advisor, he had exactly the right balance, I thought, between leaving me to do my own thing and guiding me, um, without making me feel that he was, interfering too much or directing me too strongly. And then later in life, he was just a supporter of my academic career in all kinds of ways. Um, um, he had lots of contacts. He could introduce me to people. And so I made a lot of friends in the academic world through him. And of course, his scholarship, I mean, it's just amazing, amazing stuff. And also his contribution to Bruce Mitchell's Guide to Old English uh, is it's a very good anthology of texts. I felt kind of bad, kind of going into competition with it, but um, I did it anyway. So um, the project kind of found me of doing a textbook. I'm not sure I would have done it on my own. Um, so so he was just great, and all the teachers there were just amazing at that time. Marie Boroff was there, whose translation of Sir Gawain Green Knight is just so amazing. Steve Barney, who went on to a long career and good career, and UC Riverside, and other people. It was just a brilliant collection of medievalists at Yale at that time. I was very, very lucky.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
What what area of Old English scholarship have you found kind of most engaging, most entertaining over the years? That is, what kind of texts or even things about Old English have you found the most entertaining to study?
I like things that are a puzzle. Um, I like things that have to be worked out. Um, so I really enjoyed the editing projects that I took on. Uh, with Michael Lapidge, I did the edition of Bjerkfjærth's Enchiridion. Um, and that was fun because, well, the text is kind of a puzzle. It's a mess and it's got to be kind of stitched back together. But it was also fun to puzzle out. I'm not, a mathematician or anything like that to puzzle out all of the things he was trying to teach about the cosmos, about the calculation of Easter and that kind of stuff. Was entertaining to me. And the when I did the Chronicle edition, I was given a choice of volumes. I could do the easy, straightforward text, or I could do the messy, horrible text. And I chose the messy, horrible text because it was just a fascinating thing, to puzzle out what is this thing? How did it come about? What's the story behind it? Um, so even though it's a minor chronicle text, I really enjoyed it because it had to be puzzled out, it had to be pieced together.
Mhm.
Um, for me, scholarship has been often at its most fun, a kind of detective story, where you've got to find the solution to to the problem. Uh,
What would you consider? Do you have any kind of like leisure reading texts that you just find interesting?
you mean medieval texts?
For sure, maybe that are less kind of demanding mentally than the Enchiridion.
Um, I don't think if I'm just reading, I don't go for any particular kind of text. And these days I mostly read um, if I need to. I've been uh, associated with the Dumbarton Oaks Medieval Library for a number of years. I just got off their board, but that involved going through about five of their volumes. Listeners should, your viewers should know about this series if they don't,
I've
because
recommended it to them multiple times.
oh,
Yeah, I have one
uh,
sitting on my desk right here, the Beowulf manuscript.
oh yeah, that's a great one. And uh, but each of those is thoroughly vetted by at least two people. Um, and they're people like me, people who know their Old English pretty well. And so they're very high quality work. They're usually very high quality when they get to us. But anyway, most of the reading I've done over the past few years has been reading volumes for the Dumbarton Oaks Medieval Library. Um, and sometimes that gets me into areas that I haven't been into before. Like one of them was the anonymous Lives of Saints, um, which is also an excellent volume if you like Lives of Saints. And uh, again, it's a difficult text. It's a difficult book because they're in all kinds of different dialects written at different periods and so on. Um, but um, but that was fun. Orosius, other things. It's just it gives me a chance. It gave me a chance to go deeper into texts than I would have done because I had to check them for correctness, but check translations for correctness and punctuation and all that. But it's I haven't really chosen my medieval reading for myself, um, at least not in a number of years. Um, Always enjoyed the Icelandic sagas, like teaching them, and I just like that world.
That's pretty
Um,
cool that you were involved with the Dumbarton Oaks project. How long ago did you kind of get into that? How long have you been doing that for?
I'm not sure. I think I probably did about five volumes for them in the end, probably at the rate of one every couple of years, and so probably about 10 years. I was. on that. And I just had a feeling they should get somebody younger um, to be on. No, really, I mean, uh, it's important to keep these boards fresh, and I was getting tired and uh, and feeling it was time to move on. Um, so I hope they hire somebody younger. Um, or it's not hire. I mean, take on somebody younger to fill that place.
Well, I've been reading the Orosius with my viewers over the past couple weeks, and I obviously can't show them like the text. You know, I don't. There's no online version of the
Hmm.
Dunbarton Arts book, but my own preparation, I've been using it, and it's a pretty great addition. So, thank you for your service and
Well,
helping it get
you've
out
been
there
using the Dunbar notes
for
thing.
Orosius. Yeah, yeah.
I thought I recognized the old. Looking at one of your videos, I thought I recognized the old sweet. What's that sweet
The
edition
online one that I was using, I'm
you're
not sure
using?
who. It's very old.
It's very old. You couldn't use the Janet Bately from the 80s. I don't think it'd be, I don't think it was ever online. And of course, it'd be locked down by copyright, so it couldn't be put online.
Yeah.
But Sweet was very good. I mean, he knew what he was doing. So,
Yeah, there are a few textual differences. Godin goes for a much different reading on several occasions than Sweet did, which is odd. And the a lot of the spelling choices aren't explained in Sweet's edition. He just kind of like he gives one of the forms on the side occasionally, but a lot of
mhm.
times he doesn't. So it can be a little confusing to understand why they opt for different spellings and different occasions. That has kind of been like a side puzzle of mine as I've
Yeah.
been working through the text.
Yeah. Well, Sweet used the oldest manuscript where it was available. Um, I don't remember the manuscript designation of it or who has it, but it's got gaps in it, and he would fill in from a later manuscript when the early one was deficient. I think what Malcolm decided to do, if I remember rightly, was to use a later manuscript that was complete um, so that he didn't have to fill in. And he thought since there were good editions of that were based as much as possible on the early manuscript, that it would be a service to readers to use the later one. And you probably noticed that the later manuscripts will not only have later spellings, but sometimes they'll substitute later constructions as well. So I think what you're getting there is a bit of a lesson in what scribes did, because an 11th century scribe dealing with a text of circa 900 would, uh, he'd say, "Well, I don't think my readers are going to understand this phrase here. I think I've got to make a substitution." And you see that happening a good bit. You can see it in the chronicle manuscripts, some of them very early, some of them quite late, that sometimes the scribes of the later manuscripts will make a substitution um, of, an easy late construction for a difficult early construction.
Yeah, it's almost comical sometimes seeing these late manuscripts of kind of early texts.
Hmm.
In the Orosius, there will be several sentences that really stupefy me, and I have to really kind of double check and triple check to make sure I read it correctly. And until I realize it's just a misspelling or another like perhaps they've mistaken it for a different word or something like that.
That happens. Sometimes the late
Yeah.
scribe just doesn't understand something he's seen. Say a scribe um, copying a 150-year-old text would be like our copying a text of what, Dickens, maybe? Um, and um, Dickens will throw modern readers for a loop sometimes, every now and again. Not too often, but often enough that I think that it's a decent comparison. Um, if you've if people have found Dickens difficult sometimes, that's what these scribes are up against at times.
Mhm.
Um,
Is there any chance you worked on the Augustine, the Soliloquies book from Dumbarton Oaks?
um, no. Do we even have a soliloquies book? I don't think I did.
It's pretty funny. The spellings for like because it's Leslie Lockett from Ohio State University that
Hmm.
does that translation,
Yeah.
and I mean, she presents the text as is, and a lot like some of the spellings are like laughable. Like they will write that with T and then like an A and then like an ash and then like a thorn and like that's how they write like they spelled it backwards you
Well,
know
it's
like it
crazy late stuff. It's a
yeah
12th century manuscript. It's really, um, promptly if that guy weren't copying an Old English text, he would be writing a kind of early Middle English, and there's probably a lot that he just didn't understand
hmm
in there. It's really kind of a tragedy that we don't have an earlier manuscript of that.
hmm
Um, I think maybe somebody tried to kind of translate it into early West Saxon, but it's just too far gone, I think. It can't be recovered.
one project of mine actually was doing that and I released an audiobook of the soliloquies in a standardized early West Saxon but it took me a long time
It would be
it was a
difficult.
lot of work
It would be difficult. And if you've got late constructions in there, I don't think you could probably easily recover the early ones. Did you try to uh, substitute early constructions for later ones?
I assumed that if I didn't really bother. I just kind of assumed that if there were late constructions in there, then it would be fine to just leave them as is.
Yeah,
You know, what can you
yeah,
do with that kind of thing?
yeah.
The last question I wanted to ask you, if you were stuck on a desert island and you could only have one medieval text, do you think it would be the Enchiridion or
No.
would it be something else?
I finished with the Enchiridion in 1995. I haven't looked back much. Um, as a text, it was never um, it was never all that entertaining. I think probably if I had to choose one medieval text, it would probably be Beowulf, honestly.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean, I know the text extremely well. I've taught it over and over again over the years, but I've never gotten tired of it. I suppose it would be smart to choose something that I haven't read at all, um, and so I might go for something like that. That would take some thought, but among the things that I know pretty well, I think it would probably be Beowulf. It's a brilliant story, a brilliant poem, um, verbally brilliant every inch of the way through, um, and I've always loved it.
I couldn't agree more. Do you have anything to give to the viewers as a parting message?
Um, Not really. I just encourage people who are interested to dive in and have fun and not worry too much about getting things, you know, not to worry too much about being precisely correct every inch of the way, but let yourself go, let yourself make mistakes, and and have fun with it. That's the impression I've gotten, tracking uh, the odd group of people who are writing Old English on Reddit or wherever, that they're having fun, and and they should have fun, doing translating popular songs, coming up with messages to put, on their arms via tattoos and so on. It should be fun, and it is, and I hope that something like the Alice book will give people a sense of how much fun it can be to deal with early languages, of which there are a lot, and um, plenty of languages that Alice in Wonderland has not been translated into yet. For anybody who wants to do that, there's Old Saxon, there's Goth. Oh, no, but Gothic has been done, but lots of languages.
Well, I'll have the link to the new Alice book in the description of this video.
Okay,
Um,
thanks.
and to the viewers, thank you all for watching. This has been Peter Baker. And until next time, Farafie Isunde.